Sonoma and throughout the state? Ordinance 13A was established by the Board of Supervisors in 2016, and it came after a lot of concern expressed by the community, mostly in the northern part of the county initially. We started with a couple pilots, and then we moved into actually doing the pilots, actually having the Tubbs fire, which threw everything off in terms of a pilot. The next year was busy with recovery efforts, and we really didn't start inspections until last summer, and then again this year. So this will be our second year of doing inspections, working in conjunction with local fire districts, 8 specifically, throughout the county. And the ordinance this past June was amended to our initial work was to align the ordinance closer to what was going on in Napa County as well as Marin County. But given the COVID situation, some of the expense that would be required of property owners, the decision was made to not make those modifications, but merely do some administrative changes to align Chapter 13A to the Chapter 1 requirements, if you will, for the, the stick part of enforcing an ordinance and fines and fees. The name of the ordinance was changed from the Abatement of Hazardous Vegetation and Combustible Fuels ordinance to Defensible Space and the Abatement of Hazardous Vegetation and Combustible Fuels. And the idea there is that our focus really is about defensible space in that 0 to 30, 0 to 100 foot segment or zone around the structures, and some discussion and recommendations around clearing a 0 to 5 path, which studies have proven most recently, and research has come back indicating that our biggest source of losing homes and structures is really associated with what's around that structure. So while we did not get to move in that direction, certainly discussion is continuing, and I know there's discussion going on at the state level, and we'll see how that shakes out in the long term. The other thing with our ordinance was a exemption for cannabis. Big issue right now with use permits and the fire safe standards, and numerous things are going on throughout the county. But at this point, the determination policy direction was to create a exemption for that, as well as an exemption for ag properties, predominantly or basically the crops at ag properties and also around roadsides. And so we'll still be able to look at around structures, the 0 to 100 foot thing, but we will not be looking for those that may do some farming by neglect. We will not be able to address those in terms of 13A. At this point, the goal for this year using that ordinance is to complete roughly 2,400 inspections. And as you all probably know, the county has 50,000 or more parcels. And so the reality is that as we move forward and we look at funding opportunities, there's a much larger inventory of what we can potentially inspect and educate the public on in terms of what they need to do to create a safe buffer and defensible space. So there's still much work to do, and we're constantly looking at funding opportunities to support expanding that. So again, for this year, we're looking at 2,400 inspections, working with 8 fire district partners. Our focus, again, this year is on parcels zoned for 5 acres or less in the local responsibility area. As you know, probably 70% of the county is, I believe, SRA, but we work very closely with our partner, Cal Fire, to do what we can in order to collaborate and hopefully increase the footprint of the types of inspections we do. This year, we're not really going to be doing the same thing as they focus SRA, we focus on LRA for this year, but we will address complaints that CAL FIRE has not had an opportunity to address, and we confer with them before we do any of that to ensure that we don't inundate, if you will, the residents with both agencies trying to gain compliance. The other, probably most important part of the ordinance was the removal of the 5-acre zoning designation. And so a lot of people confuse that zoning designation with size of the parcel. It's really different. The zoning designation really is a planning term and addresses the ability for certain areas of the county for properties to be subdivided. So that confused a lot of people. And so the feedback that we received from local fire districts and other stakeholders was that we should remove that. And so that happened as part of the amendments authorized by the board. So that means effective July 24th, every parcel in Sonoma County is potentially under the requirements and can be held accountable based on items identified in Ordinance 13A. And so, again, it's another tool towards working forward in gaining compliance from residents. And then we'll just share as a side note a couple things while I'm on, and Caerleon can speak to more details, but we have a couple grants in the hopper through the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. I'll let her speak to that once I'm off the line, but one is for updating of the Community Wildfire Protection Plan. The other is a vegetation management inspection evaluation type process to give residents the information they need to create defensible space. And we're going to implement that without penalty. So the stick part will not be a part of what we're trying to gain voluntary compliance. And they will have an opportunity to actually receive money through an incentive program. There's matches involved, things like that. That's one side of that grant. It's about a $6.6 million grant. The other side of it is structural hardening. And so evaluating homes for their resistiveness to an approaching fire. And again, another opportunity to evaluate what needs to be done to a home or structure, and incentives for the residents to be able to do some of the work. And so the last piece I'll talk about is the board approved last fiscal year the Expanded Fuels and Landscape Resiliency Campaign, which was $900,000 from TOT, or Transfer Occupancy Tax funding, which is basically a form of general fund to fund small partial inspections, the abatements that would need to happen as part of that, potentially public outreach and education, additional funding for administration, if you will, capped at 10%, as well as funding for large parcel coordination. And we're still working through that. We believe that once the CWPP is done based on the fuel modeling that occurs, that we will be able to identify priority projects in areas throughout the county, and then work through that process with private property owners and many stakeholders that are on the Zoom call today, in an effort to create that synergy that's needed, where we all work together collaboratively to ultimately create an opportunity to reduce fuels, educate the public, and hopefully lower the fire hazard and risk in Sonoma County. And so as people often say, it takes a village. This is going to take a village. We've been having these conversations for a long time. I think the reality today in Sonoma County is because we've experienced these devastating fires, the public is much more aware of the threat and the risk of fire, and they're asking a lot of us in leading and providing resources and information they can use, again, to create a safer Sonoma County. So with that, I'm going to have to go to another meeting. Would certainly appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, we so appreciate you being here to present. Thank you, Chief.
Any quick questions? I'm happy to answer them. I got about 5 minutes. The other thing is I failed to mention that we have been working with UCCE and the Sonoma Ecology Center. Some of the drawings and things that we've done about spacing on vegetation, shrubs, things like that have been incorporated into some of the mailers, documents, and information that we sent out to the public. But again, very narrow footprint of 2,400 properties or so out of the many that exist in the county.
Any questions? Okay.
Are there any efforts from anybody at the group here to maybe try to apply for a forest health grant to maybe help bring crews to individual residences that don't have the ability to do this kind of work? I mean, we're hearing Sonoma Ecology Center has crews set up, and there's North Bay CCCs, and I just wonder if there's an opportunity to work with our fire safe councils to come up with lists of potential applicants for a program, maybe that could use some help doing their defensible space. So that's more of a question, I guess, to the whole group. but go ahead.
So Chief referred to the FEMA grant that we have going for dispensable space and structural hardening. That actually does provide some incentive fundings in 14 targeted areas for this first round of funding. And I can share the screen if you want to give me that. I can show you the map of where those first pilot areas are. That does provide a little incentive funding for both structure hardening and for defensible space clearance. Finding sources of inexpensive contractors and laborers to help people with their defensible space, to help comply with their inspection requirements, is something that we've all been working on for a long time. I think that the biggest challenge with that is that it's difficult to use state or federal funding to do stuff like that, because when you are writing the grant, you don't know what the project area is going to be, because you need to have those specific project areas. So really, I think that ultimately, to make that happen, we're going to have to really work as a pack to try to get funding from foundations and others, so that we don't have to go through NEPA or CEQA with those really, really, really stringent criteria that make it almost impossible to write a grant and say, I want to help people and I want to help them over here. Because you have to say, I want to help the lady that lives at 1045 X Street. So that's the challenge with that kind of thing, unless we can find general funding to fund one of the things that Chief Williams and I have been talking about a lot lately is, well, one of the things that we really like to do is find funding for a fuels crew, similar to one they have in Marin County, which is a great model. It's a sort of a training program for firefighters who want to go into the wildland fire business, and they're out doing vegetation management both on public and private property. And it's sort of a training module, but even just a cadre of folks who can be used at low cost to go and help people who are elderly, disabled, or whatever reason that they can't comply, is something we'd love to do. It's a challenging grant hill to climb, but definitely something we're very interested in looping up.
Caerleon, if you want to share your screen, you have the sharing privileges.
Okay.
Jean, do you have a question? Unmute yourself.
Unmute. Caerleon, we had an issue, a really hard time in Mendocino County with the Western Hills Fire Safe Council. We had money, we had a grant come in, but we were not allowed to use it for private residences, even if they were elderly and disabled. And what we finally came up with, two different options. One, the Mendocino County Fire Safe Council will allow us to use it for residents if we follow a strict criteria of what their income level is, and we made up a whole document for it. I'm happy to share it with you. Or two, we had an event where we made several $1,000s, and for events, not grants, we can use it for residents. And again, it has to follow a criteria so that it doesn't look like it's being given to certain, special people.
Yeah. And that's
Okay.
the hard part with that I ran into last time I tried to do that was how do you determine what their income really is? What are the documents that you're asking for? Are you going on trust? Are you not going on trust? And if so, I don't want their Social Security number. So
Right, we don't want their taxes.
Yeah. So how do you make that real without having to gather that level of confidential detail? And we started talking many years ago. The last time I was working on this, started talking with other county programs who were saying, well, maybe we can shepherd the data and feed it to you. So I think that there are multiple ways we can make it happen. I'll tell you that with this grant, with the screen that's up now, this called the Wildfire Adapted Sonoma County Education and Incentives for Safe and Resilient Communities. It's a $6.7 million project. which is funded and in early stages of implementation. And what we're doing with this project is in these colorful areas on the map, these are the areas that we selected sort of right after the fire, saying these are areas that we know are at risk because of topography, fuels, fire history, and all of the things that go into those models, which will be created more scientifically as we move forward with the CWPP. We're going to have some really good modeling come out of this update to the CWPP, which we did not have before. So we kind of used that seat of the pants sort of determinations, and then made phone calls to the fire chiefs in the areas and said, Chief, what wakes you up at night? And that's how we came up with these project areas. And so what happens within these colorful circles is that there will be a vegetation management inspection, probably using criteria similar to or the same as the state 4291 code and some bit of 13A as well. But those inspections will be primarily, the way I describe this is the carrot and the stick. The best programs have both a carrot and a stick. And the stick that we have here is that we can do these inspections throughout these areas without getting permission previously. We can't enter over, we can't go past a lock gate, we can't go past a no trespassing sign, but we can circle up an entire area and say we are going to do inspections in all of these areas. So that's stickish, but not stick. The real stick is when you come in and you go, if you don't do what we told you to do, there's fines, fees, and abatement. So we're really not wanting to use that stick with this program unless we run into serious life safety issues. Obviously, there's going to have to be some concessions, but we don't really anticipate that. So the inspection part of this is not really going to be as enforcement-driven as a normal 13A or CAL FIRE inspection program is. So we'll go in first, do that vegetation management inspection. And we leave in a little note that says, if you would like to have your home assessed for structural vulnerabilities, sign up here. We'll send the inspector out who will do a prioritized list of potential retrofit. And if they get their defensible space done, then they are not only, which they can use incentive funding to do, so they can not only get their defensible space work done, but we will also provide, I think we're at $8,000 to do structure hardening, or 50%. So if you did a $10,000 project, would give you, $8,000 to get it done. If you did a $2,000 project, would give you $1,000 to get it done. So we're really hoping that that works out well. We're, like I said, we're in the early stages. We kind of just got our staff in place to move forward with this, and so we're ready to roll. But I'm really anticipating that this is going to be a really important project and will probably be used as a model. I also submitted another grant to do the same thing within the last month. So we'll hopefully be expanding these project areas to other at-risk areas through the county in sort of a second round of this same project. So this one's exciting, and we're moving forward with this. And I think there was a question, and I don't remember if I answered it. I'm good. So there's that. Any questions, feel free to contact me. The CWPP, likewise, is in the early stages. Likewise, we have just gotten staff in place to run that grant. And so but we have been working a lot on the GIS modeling side of that to circle up exactly what's the best way to use the data that's already been produced, because open space and Pepperwood and all kinds of county agencies within the county have done awesome work with GIS, Global Information System, mapping and modeling and stuff. And so the first thing that we really needed to do was bring all those people together to really look at, what do we have already? What that's out there can we use, and how can we use it? And then what do we need to build that will provide maximum benefit to both agencies to know where should we be concentrating these large fuels management projects? Where are the areas that are going to protect homes and lives? And to the public, so that the public can look at their parcel and go, ooh, risk, ooh, yeah, look at that. So that's where I think we're going to end up with the CWPP, and we're super excited about how that process is going to go.